The church smelled of lilies and candle wax, the kind of scent that makes grief settle into your lungs until every breath feels borrowed. My father's funeral was supposed to be about him, about Richard Carter, the man whose booming laugh once filled these very walls. But instead, it became the moment I learned my life had been built on something far more fragile than grief. I stood in the front row, my hands trembling against the cold wood of the pew, staring at the polished mahogany casket as if sheer willpower could bring him back. My mother, Helen Carter, 60 years old and impeccably dressed in a black designer dress that screamed money, rather than mourning, walked to the lectern with a bundle in her arms. They weren't flowers or scripture or even the neat stack of condolence cards people had been pressing into her hands all morning. No, she carried a set of old letters tied together with a faded red ribbon that looked out of place in the heavy darkness of a funeral. My stomach twisted before she even untied it. Something about the way her fingers lingered on the ribbon like she was savoring control over what came next made me cold. I was 27 years old, a woman who thought she had already endured the worst of her family's favoritism and dismissive cruelty. I thought losing my father to cancer after months of hospital visits and whispered prayers was the last blow. But grief is cruel. It opens your ribs so the knife of betrayal can cut deeper. My fiancé Daniel stood beside me, his hand resting gently on mine, grounding me as Helen pulled the first letter free. His grip tightened when he saw the envelope. The paper was yellowed edges curled, but the ink was sharp, dark strokes from a fountain pen. Helen cleared her throat as though about to read scripture, but before she could, Daniel leaned closer to me. His body went rigid. His breath hitched, and he whispered in a voice so low I almost thought I imagined it. "Lydia," he said, using my name like it was both a warning and a lifeline. "Don't you see the date?" I blinked at the top corner of the letter. February 1997. My birthday has always been November 1997. The date on the paper was 9 months too early. 9 months that stretched like a canyon I suddenly could not cross. My chest tightened as Daniel's whisper grew sharper. "This isn't right. These are older than you are. They don't fit the story." His words echoed inside me louder than the organ music, louder than the priest's prayers, louder even than the silence of my father's absence. I tried to steady myself, but the air around me shifted and the weight of the church seemed to press down until I felt I might collapse. My mind raced. Why would my mother bring old letters to a funeral? Why would the date matter? And why, of all people, did Daniel see what I had ignored for years? Helen glanced at me, then her lips curling in a smile so cold it made my knees lock. It was not the smile of a grieving widow. It was the smile of someone who had rehearsed this moment. My vision blurred as I clutched the pew to stay upright. I wanted to scream to demand answers, but the weight of the date pinned me in place. February 1997. If that letter was real, if that handwriting belonged to the person who wrote it, then the story of my life, the story I had been told since I could form memories, was a fabrication. My heart pounded so violently I thought the entire congregation could hear it. This was not grief anymore. This was exposure. This was a blade cutting through the last illusion that I was simply the overlooked daughter of Richard and Helen Carter. As Daniel's whisper burned in my ear, as my mother's smile froze me in place, I understood with terrifying clarity. My father's funeral was not just about burying him. It was about exhuming the truth they had buried with my very identity. And for the first time in 27 years, I realized my life was a lie. Before those letters ripped the floor out from under me, my life had been an exhausting performance of pretending that normal in the Carter household was anything other than cruelty disguised as family tradition. Growing up, I learned very quickly that my mother's love was a currency she only spent on my brother Marcus. At 32, he was everything she worshipped, tall, confident Harvard MBA, the heir to Carter & Sons development. He wore his arrogance like his tailored suits cut to precision and impossible to miss. At Christmas, he received a BMW. For his 21st birthday, he got a down payment on a loft in downtown Charleston. Meanwhile, on my 18th birthday, my mother handed me a used purse with the tag still dangling, clearly regifted from someone else. "Don't pout, Lydia," she said when I didn't fake a smile fast enough. "Your brother deserves more. He's the future of this family. You should just be proud to stand by him." I learned to swallow bitterness in silence like medicine I was forced to take every day. My father, Richard, was the only one who ever looked at me differently. His health had already begun to decline by the time I was in college, but I still remember nights he'd slip into my dorm parking lot just to hand me an envelope with grocery money. "Don't tell your mother," he'd whisper. "She doesn't understand that you're strong in ways Marcus never will be." It was his quiet rebellion, but he never confronted her outright. He was always half absent working late, then later simply fading away into the haze of chemotherapy. The normalcy in our family gatherings was suffocating. At Thanksgiving, my mother arranged the seating like a battlefield. Marcus at her right, me shoved to the far corner near the kitchen door. I can still hear the scrape of dishes smell the lemon cleaner from the staff wiping counters behind me while my brother toasted his bright future and everyone clapped. No one looked at me. Not even my mother. It was as if I were a guest they regretted inviting. And yet, I clung to scraps of affection, convincing myself that at least I had a place. I kept working teaching second graders, paying my own bills, building a modest but honest life. I hoped that one day, maybe when my father passed, my mother would soften. Maybe grief would carve a space in her heart for me. But that hope was like trying to draw water from stone. Even as Dad's body failed, Helen's focus stayed fixed on Marcus and the empire he would inherit. The irony is, I believed the story. I believed I was simply the unwanted child, the shadow. I told myself it made sense Marcus was the golden child, I was the extra. Painful, yes, but explainable. That was the normal I accepted for 27 years. My friends often asked why I tolerated my mother's coldness, and I'd shrug, half joking. Not everyone gets the warm family Christmas commercials promise. But inside, I always wondered why the ache felt sharper than just favoritism. Why the silences in my childhood seemed weighted. Why my mother avoided old family albums or stories from before I turned 5. On the morning of the funeral, before Daniel whispered those words that cracked reality open, I actually rehearsed a speech in my head. Something small, dignified: "Dad, thank you for the quiet kindness, for the envelopes, for seeing me." I thought I would say it in a whisper by his graveside, letting the soil absorb my gratitude. That was supposed to be my closure. I had no idea my closure was about to be torn away and replaced with something unrecognizable. Looking back, all those moments of being sidelined, dismissed, treated like excess luggage, they were not just cruelty. They were camouflage. I wasn't just the unwanted daughter. I was something far more dangerous to Helen and Marcus, a secret that if uncovered could shatter their power. But on that day, before the letters were untied, before Daniel froze at the sight of a date, I still lived in the lie of false normalcy. I still thought my story was simply one of neglect. I had no idea it was about to become a war over identity inheritance and the truth my mother had spent decades burying. The red ribbon slipped loose from my mother's fingers with the same elegance she used to pour champagne at Marcus's birthday dinners, deliberate and smug. The bundle of envelopes fell open in her hands, yellowed paper, whispering against itself as though it had been waiting years to be heard. The first letter she lifted trembled only slightly, not from grief, but from the thrill of control. I felt it. Everyone did. The ink on the page was still sharp, despite the age of the paper looping cursive in blue fountain pen. My eyes caught the top right corner first, the numbers so crisp they seemed carved into my skull. February 14th, 1997. Valentine's Day. My heart should have warmed at the thought, but instead, ice crawled through my chest, because I was not born until November 1997. That date didn't belong to me yet, somehow it did. My fiancé, Daniel's hand clamped around mine. He wasn't just uneasy, he was stricken. His jaw tightened and his eyes flicked between the page and me like he was watching a bomb tick down. He leaned in so close I felt his breath in my ear. "Lydia," he whispered, each syllable heavy as stone. "Don't you see the date? This letter is older than you. It doesn't fit the story they told you." The room tilted. My ears filled with the muffled drone of the priest continuing his prayer, but the words lost shape. I stared harder at the letter. The handwriting wasn't familiar, not my father's strong block script, not Helen's sharp, angled notes. It was from someone else, someone signing her name at the bottom, Margaret Doyle. The name meant nothing to me yet. The loops of the signature felt like a hand reaching from the grave. Helen's voice cut through the fog. "These are just some of your father's old correspondences," she announced to the mourners as though this were part of the eulogy. Her tone was sugar-coated poison. He liked to keep letters. Business family things that don't matter anymore. But the words on the page screamed the opposite. "She is safe with you for now. Keep her hidden. They must not know until the estate is secure." I read them 3 times, each one slicing deeper. She is safe with you for now. Who was she? Was it me? Why would anyone write to my father about hiding a child? And why, of all places, would my mother choose to reveal this at his funeral? My stomach flipped as Daniel squeezed my hand harder, his knuckles white. "This isn't an accident," he murmured. "She wanted you to see this. She wanted all of them to see this." His glance toward Marcus said it all. My brother sat smirking, arms folded, like a man who already knew the script and was waiting for the audience to catch up. I tried to speak, but my throat locked. The date pulsed in my vision, February 1997, mocking me with its impossibility. My pulse raced so fast I thought I might faint right there in front of the casket. For 27 years, I had believed I was simply the daughter who never measured up. Now I had to wonder if I was even their daughter at all. The letter fluttered as Helen lowered it to the lectern, her smile thin and victorious. "Family secrets always have a way of coming out," she said softly. Words only I could hear. My blood went cold. The trigger had been pulled. The letters were no sentimental relic. They were evidence, and with a single date my mother had cracked my entire life in half. The letters would not leave my mind. That night after the funeral, after the lilies had wilted in the church air and the last casserole dish had been carried home by pitying neighbors, I sat at the small oak desk in my apartment with the envelope spread out before me. My hands shook as I pulled them from my bag where I had hidden them away before Helen could reclaim them. The paper smelled faintly of dust and cedar, like a box long forgotten in an attic. I read each line until the words blurred. Again and again, the same handwriting appeared elegant but desperate, signed by the same name, Margaret Doyle. Daniel sat across from me, his laptop open, his face pale in the glow of the screen. He wasn't letting emotion cloud his judgment the way I was. He was treating the letters like evidence, his engineering mind already shifting into problem-solving mode. "Look at the ink," he said, adjusting the lamp. "Consistent. No smudges that suggest recent forgery. If someone faked this, they did it decades ago." He pointed at the dates: February 1997, April 1997, July 1997, all before November, the month of my supposed birth. The phrase that repeated through 2 of the letters clawed at me. "She is safe with you for now. They must not know." Every time I read it, I felt a coil tightening in my chest. The "she could only be me." But why would my father need to hide me, and from whom? I tried to dismiss it, to convince myself there had to be an explanation, but my memories began lining up like dominoes, each one tipping into the next. The birth certificate, Dad once said, had a clerical error. The way Helen bristled any time I asked about baby pictures. The family albums where the first 5 years of my life were strangely sparse, filled with Marcus's milestones, while mine seemed cut short, like someone had plucked me out of one life and dropped me into another. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low but urgent. "Lydia, you told me once you were born at St. Mary's Hospital downtown, right?" I nodded, the memory vague, shaped more by my parents' insistence than anything I truly recalled. He began typing furiously, digging through public health archives. Within minutes, his lips tightened into a grim line. "There's no record of a Lydia Carter born at St. Mary's on November 22nd in 1997. I felt my blood turn to ice. "Maybe it's just a clerical mistake," I whispered, but my voice lacked conviction even to my own ears. "Maybe once," he said gently, but combined with these letters, he tapped the paper with a finger. "That's not coincidence." I pushed away from the desk, pacing the small living room. My breaths came sharp and shallow. I thought of the photo album Mom brought out once when I was 12. The one where my baby picture showed me bundled in a blanket, but the shadow on the carpet beneath the crib bent the wrong way. I'd asked about it innocent, and Helen snapped, "Don't question things you don't understand." Then she shut the album and locked it away. Now the memory landed like a hammer blow. All the little inconsistencies I had buried to keep the fragile illusion of family intact were breaking through, demanding attention. Daniel closed the laptop and stood taking my trembling hands in his. "Lydia, this isn't just favoritism. This is bigger. Your mother, Helen, she's hiding something about where you came from. These letters are the first real cracks. If we keep digging, we'll find the rest." Tears burned in my eyes, not from weakness, but from rage. For years, I had accepted being overlooked, dismissed, treated as lesser than Marcus. I told myself it was a curse of birth order, of personality, of fate. But what if it was deliberate? What if they had always known I wasn't really theirs, that my place at the table had been a performance, and the cruelty was simply a method of control? I pressed the letters to my chest, my heart pounding beneath them like a drumbeat of war. For the first time, the thought struck me with terrifying clarity. My family's cruelty hadn't been random. It had been camouflage. And now, with a few pieces of paper and a missing hospital record, that camouflage was starting to tear. Sleep didn't come that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the date on the letter glowing in the darkness like a brand seared into my mind. February 14th, 1997. 9 months before I was supposed to exist. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Daniel's steady breathing beside me, the only reminder that I wasn't completely alone. But even his presence couldn't silence the floodgates in my memory. The first image that surfaced was faint, hazy, like a film strip left too long in the sun. I must have been 6, maybe younger, sitting on the swings at a small park on the edge of Charleston. I remembered the creak of rusted chains, the crunch of gravel under shoes, and then a woman's voice. Soft trembling calling my name. Not Lydia. Something else. A name I didn't recognize then, but that lodged like a splinter. She had red hair, I think, and green eyes that shone with tears. She crouched to my level, her hands reaching for mine. For one moment, I felt warmth as if I belonged in her arms. And then, just as suddenly, Helen was there. She yanked me back, her nails digging into my shoulder. "Get away from her!" she hissed at the woman. "She's confused. She doesn't know what she's saying." I cried, not because I was afraid of the stranger, but because of the rage twisting my mother's face. Later, Helen told me that woman was crazy. Forget her. I did. Until now. Another memory came sharper this time. I was 9, rummaging through the hallway closet looking for wrapping paper. I found a box shoved behind the coats. Inside were baby clothes, but they weren't mine. A tiny pink dress embroidered with initials that didn't match mine. MD. I brought it to Helen, expecting an explanation. Her face went white. She ripped the dress from my hands and slapped the box shut. "Stop snooping," she snapped. "That's nothing to do with you." She locked the closet and never mentioned it again. At the time, I thought I had done something wrong. Now I knew the truth. The dress belonged to someone else. Someone I might have been before she renamed me. The more I let the memories unravel, the faster they came. Whispers through thin walls at night. My father's voice low, urgent. "She'll find out someday, Helen. We can't keep this forever." My mother's harsh reply. "She'll have nothing if she does. Marcus is the heir. Lydia is the shadow. Let it be." I had buried those sounds as nightmares, convinced myself they were echoes of childhood fear, but in the stillness of my darkened bedroom, I knew they were real. They had always been real. Tears slid hot down my cheeks as I curled into myself. Daniel stirred sitting up beside me, his hand gentle on my shoulder. "What is it?" he asked softly. I shook my head, unable to put the torrent into words. How could I explain that every scrap of my childhood was rearranging itself into a map of lies, that every slight, every dismissal, every cold stare from my mother had not been cruelty alone, but strategy, to keep me blind, to keep me small, to keep me from asking the questions that would lead to nights like this? I remember things I whispered finally. My voice cracked. Things I didn't want to believe. "She's been hiding me, Daniel, my entire life. She's been hiding me from someone else." He pulled me close, his arms steady, his presence the only anchor in a storm that threatened to sweep me away. Then we find out who he said simply. Piece by piece, memory by memory, letter by letter. You're not crazy. They're the ones who twisted the story. It's time to take it back. The phrase echoed in me long after he said it. Take it back. My name, my history, my truth. I could no longer pretend to be the girl who was just overlooked, the daughter who never measured up. The memories had shifted the ground beneath me, and now there was no turning back. That night, for the first time, I stopped mourning only my father. I began mourning the girl I thought I was. And with that mourning came something sharper than grief resolve. By the next morning, my grief had transformed into something sharper, something with edges. I could not unsee the date on those letters or unhear the whispers that haunted my childhood. Daniel was already awake, pacing the kitchen with his phone pressed to his ear. His eyes met mine as I walked in still in the wrinkled black dress from the funeral, and he ended the call quickly. You need someone who understands this kind of thing, he said firmly. Not just me, a lawyer. The word sank into my chest like an anchor. A lawyer meant this wasn't paranoia. It wasn't just trauma twisting old memories. It was real enough for someone outside of my nightmare to weigh in. I nodded through my stomach flipped. I called Denise Harper, Daniel said. She's the attorney who helped my colleague with a family estate mess last year. Smart, ruthless when she needs to be. She agreed to meet you this afternoon. Hours later, I sat in a leather chair that squeaked under my weight across from a woman who looked like she'd walked straight out of a courtroom drama. Denise Harper was in her early 40s, sharp navy suit, hair pulled into a sleek bun, and eyes that missed nothing. She leafed through the letters I had brought wearing gloves so as not to smudge the aging paper. Every so often, her brow furrowed. These aren't love notes, she said finally. Her voice was calm, but carried the weight of finality. They're custodial directives. Whoever Margaret Doyle is, she believed your father was protecting you. And she mentioned an estate. That means money, property, or legal control was tied to your identity. I swallowed hard. Are you saying my parents Helen hid me to control inheritance? Denise leaned forward, her hands folded over the stack of letters. That's what it looks like. And if your birth records don't exist where they're supposed to, that's another serious red flag. It suggests falsification. You need to prepare yourself, Lydia. This isn't just favoritism. This could be fraud. The word clanged in my ears. Fraud. My entire life reduced to a legal term that carried weight in courtrooms and prison sentences. What do I do? I whispered. You preserve evidence, Denise said. Photograph every letter, store them in multiple places. Do not let your mother know you have them. Do not confront her yet. Next, we file a request for your original birth certificate. If it's missing, that's proof. And if it's been altered, we can track the alterations. The paper trail doesn't lie. I nodded numbly, each instruction stitching itself into my mind like a road map, and Lydia Denise added, her eyes softening. You need to understand that once we start, we can't stop halfway. Your mother will fight this. Your brother will too. But the law doesn't bend to charm or money. If you're ready, we'll expose the truth. I felt Daniel's hand slide into mine, grounding me the way he always did. My pulse steadied. For years, I had been silenced, told I was dramatic, ungrateful, invisible. But in this office with evidence laid out and an attorney calling it fraud, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't in years. Power. I drew a breath that rattled but didn't break. Let's do it, I said. Let's find out who I really am. And with that, the official machinery of truth began to turn. 2 days after the funeral, when the casseroles had gone cold and the mourners stopped calling, I returned to the Carter estate. The sprawling, white-columned house that once felt intimidating now looked like a stage built for lies. Daniel urged me to wait until Denise gathered more paperwork, but the silence from my mother gnawed at me. I needed to see her. I needed her to say something, anything that would make sense of the letters. The house smelled of polish and expensive perfume, the same Chanel scent that clung to my mother like armor. She was waiting in the parlor dressed immaculately in black silk, a glass of sherry in her hand, though it was barely noon. Marcus lounged on the leather sofa beside her legs crossed Rolex, catching the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. He smirked as soon as he saw me as if this meeting were entertainment. You've been busy, Helen said coolly, her eyes flicking to the folder clutched in my hand. Running around with those letters like they're gospel. I assume Daniel put you up to this. He always struck me as the meddling type. I set the folder down on the coffee table between us. These letters aren't gossip, Mother. They're proof. Proof that something about my birth doesn't add up. Why would a woman named Margaret Doyle write to Dad about keeping a child hidden in 1997? Why does my supposed birth certificate not exist at the hospital you claimed I was born in? Helen's smile never faltered, but her eyes flashed with irritation. You're letting grief make you hysterical. Richard had business all over the South. Margaret Doyle could have been a client, a friend, anyone. Those letters mean nothing. They mean everything I snapped. They match the whispers I heard as a child. Dad telling you that I'd find out someday. You telling him to keep me in the shadows. I remember, Mother. You called me the shadow, and now I know why. For the first time, Marcus spoke, his voice dripping with mockery. Oh, here we go. Lydia the detective finally putting her teaching degree to use. Do you have any idea how pathetic you sound? You think a few dusty letters change who you are. You're a Carter because we said so. End of story. My blood boiled, but I forced my voice steady. End of story. No Marcus. Beginning of truth. And if I have to drag it into the light through courtrooms and archives, I will. Dad left me more than memories. He left me a sealed envelope with his lawyer. I haven't opened it yet, but I will. And I bet it confirms what you and Mother have been hiding my entire life. Helen's face blanched for the briefest moment, the first crack in her mask, but she recovered quickly, sipping her sherry as though unbothered. Richard was weak, she said flatly. He clung to sentiment, to guilt. He wanted to make everyone happy, but happiness is not how families survive. Power is. Control is. You should be thanking me, Lydia. Without me, you'd be nothing but a pawn in someone else's game. I gave you a name. I gave you a home. You should be grateful. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Grateful for what? For being ignored at every birthday, for being treated like Marcus's servant, for being erased in photographs and silenced when I asked questions. That's not family. That's captivity. The room crackled with attention. Marcus leaned forward, his smirk fading into something colder. Listen carefully, little sister, he said, spitting the word like poison. Dad's gone. Mom holds the estate. I hold the company. You have nothing. Play your little games with letters and lawyers, but at the end of the day, no one will believe you. You'll end up alone, broke and humiliated. And when that happens, don't come crawling back. I met his gaze without flinching. You're wrong. I'm not the shadow anymore. Evidence never blinks. And when the truth comes out, it won't be me crawling. Silence hung heavy, broken only by the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. Helen set down her glass with a sharp clink. Get out, she said, her voice icy. If you want war, Lydia, then war is what you'll get. But don't forget, we play to win. I turned to leave my heart pounding, but not with fear. For the first time, I felt the fire of defiance in my veins. They had underestimated me for 27 years. They would not make that mistake again. The following week, Denise called me into her office. The space smelled faintly of leather and coffee, her bookshelves lined with case files that whispered of battles won and lost. On her desk lay a thick manila envelope sealed in wax, the name. For my daughter, should she ask, scrawled in my father's unmistakable handwriting. My breath caught. This was it, the envelope Marcus and Helen had tried so hard to pretend did not exist. Daniel sat beside me, his hand steady on my knee, while Denise slid the envelope across the desk with the care of someone handling live explosives. Richard Carter's private attorney delivered this yesterday, she said. He held it back until after the funeral. Your father wanted you to find it yourself. My fingers trembled as I broke the wax. Inside was a folded document, edges brittle with age. I unfolded it slowly, and the words at the top blurred until I forced my eyes to focus. Certificate of Live Birth. My heart lurched, but the name written there was not Lydia Carter. It was Lydia Margaret Doyle, born February 14th, 1997, Savannah, Georgia. The room spun. My father's letter slipped out next, handwritten in his steady block script. My dearest Lydia, by now you will have questions. Your mother Helen is not the woman who gave you life. Margaret Doyle is your biological mother. When you were an infant, her family estate was under dispute. Helen insisted we keep you hidden until it was resolved. I thought it would be temporary. But time passed, lies deepened, and I failed to stop her. I hoped to tell you myself, but I grew too weak. Forgive me. You deserved the truth sooner. Tears blurred the ink. For years I had begged Helen with my silence to give me a scrap of affection, believing I was defective, unworthy. But the truth was, I was never hers to love. She had stolen me, reshaped me, erased me, and convinced the world I was hers. Daniel's voice broke through the ringing in my ears. It's all here, Lydia. The name, the date, the proof. His tone carried awe and anger in equal measure. Denise tapped the certificate with one manicured nail. This is legal dynamite. If authentic, it invalidates every birth record Helen filed for you. It also opens the door to inheritance claims Margaret Doyle's family may have intended for you. Helen's control is crumbling. I pressed the papers to my chest, my tears falling hot and fast. My father had been complicit, yes, but he had also been my only quiet ally. Even in betrayal, he had tried to give me back what was mine. Memories surged: the red-haired woman at the park, the pink dress with the initials MD, the whispers through walls. They weren't figments. They were fragments of my real life trying to claw their way through the darkness Helen imposed. I have to find her, I whispered. I have to find Margaret Doyle. Daniel squeezed my hand. We will. You're not doing this alone. Denise leaned back, eyes sharp with resolve. Be ready. When Helen realizes you've opened this, she'll fight harder than ever. But you have truth now. And truth, Lydia, is something they can't buy or bully into silence. For the first time in my life, I held a piece of paper that didn't make me feel like a shadow. It made me feel real. My name was not Lydia Carter. It was Lydia Margaret Doyle. And the war my mother promised in the parlor was about to begin, with me armed not by her lies, but by my truth. I walked out of Denise's office, clutching the birth certificate like it was both a weapon and a wound. The name on the page, Lydia Margaret Doyle, echoed in my head with every step. For 27 years, I had been Lydia Carter, the overlooked daughter, the shadow. But now, with one fragile document, I was someone else entirely. And somewhere out there, the woman who had written those letters, my real mother, was alive. Daniel refused to let me bury myself in panic. That night, he opened his laptop at our kitchen table, determination etched into every line of his face. We're going to find her, he said. Margaret Doyle, Savannah, Georgia. Teach her if the letters are telling the truth. He typed with the urgency of someone racing against time, pulling up public records yearbooks, archived news articles. I hovered beside him, torn between dread and desperate hope. The first hit was a decades-old missing persons notice. Infant girl Lydia Doyle reported missing from Savannah in February 1997. Mother Margaret Doyle, age 26. Case remains unsolved. My breath caught in my throat. There it was, my name before it had been stolen. I stared at the grainy photo of a young woman with red hair and solemn green eyes holding a baby bundled in a pink blanket. The initials embroidered on the hem read, MD, the dress, the one I had found as a child before Helen snatched it away. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stifle a sob. It's her. Daniel, it's her. I wasn't imagining. She's real. Daniel kept scrolling his fingers quick. There's more. Margaret Doyle, now 52, still lives in Savannah. Elementary school teacher, active in local community organizations. She never moved far from where she lost you. He turned the screen to me. The photo was recent, pulled from a local news site. Her hair was still red, though streaked with gray, her smile gentle but touched by sadness. She looked familiar. Not because I knew her, but because I saw pieces of myself reflected in her eyes. I couldn't breathe. For years, I thought my longing for connection was weakness. Now it was recognition. She never stopped waiting, I whispered. She stayed. Denise had warned me not to act rashly, but my heart had already leapt ahead of logic. I drafted an email, hands shaking so hard I mistyped twice before Daniel steadied them. My name is Lydia. I believe I might be your daughter. I found letters you wrote to Richard Carter in 1997. I have documents with my birth name. I don't want to shock you, but I need to know the truth. Daniel read it over my shoulder. It's enough. Honest. Not too much at once. He hit send before I could lose my nerve. The next 24 hours crawled like years. Every vibration of my phone sent my stomach into knots. I barely slept, barely ate. My mind replayed every harsh word Helen had ever spat at me, every smirk from Marcus, every moment I felt unwanted. Now I understood why they had never intended for me to feel like I belonged, because I wasn't theirs to begin with. At dawn the following morning, my inbox lit up. One new message, the subject line, Lydia. My hands trembled as I opened it. My dear girl, I don't know if this is real. I don't know if my heart can survive another disappointment. But if you are who you say, then you are my daughter. I thought you were dead. I have prayed for you every day since 1997. Please, can we talk? Tears blurred the screen. Daniel wrapped his arms around me as I sobbed into his chest. The woman who had been a shadow in my memories, the woman I once thought was a stranger in the park, had been alive all along, mourning me, waiting for me. I typed back through the haze of tears. Yes, I am your daughter. I want to meet you. For the first time in 27 years, I felt the hollow space inside me begin to fill. The search was over. The contact had been made. And now the truth that Helen had buried was about to walk into the light with a face and a voice of her own. The drive to Savannah felt like moving through two worlds at once. The one I had known for 27 years, filled with Helen's cold stares and Marcus's mocking smirks, and the one waiting for me, a world where the name Doyle meant something, where I wasn't a shadow, but someone who had been loved and mourned. Daniel gripped the steering wheel as though he was carrying both of us toward destiny. I clutched the birth certificate in my lap, the paper already soft at the folds from how many times I had opened it, reread it, and wept. We pulled up to a modest brick house lined with azaleas, their blooms spilling pink against the morning sun. The screen door creaked open before I could even step out of the car. She was there, Margaret Doyle, my mother. Her hair, once fiery red, was threaded with gray pulled back in a loose bun. Her eyes, green sharp and wet with tears, locked onto mine with a hunger that words cannot describe. She pressed her hands to her mouth, stumbling down the steps as if her legs could barely carry the weight of the moment. Lydia. Her voice cracked, fragile as porcelain. I wanted to speak, but no sound came. My throat tightened, tears spilling before I could stop them. Then, her arms were around me, trembling, but fierce, pulling me into an embrace that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. The scent of lavender and chalk dust clung to her clothes, the scent of a schoolteacher of a life lived in waiting. My knees nearly gave out from the sheer force of belonging. We clung to each other in the driveway until the sobs quieted into shaking breaths. Daniel stood back, his own eyes glassy, giving us space as though he understood that this moment belonged to no one but us. Inside, Margaret poured tea. Neither of us drank. Her hands trembled as she laid out photographs across the table, me as an infant in her arms, birthdays with empty chairs, holidays where her smile never reached her eyes. I reported you missing, she whispered, but the police said there was no evidence. Your father Richard promised he would keep you safe while I fought in court against my father's estate. He said it was temporary, but then he vanished with you. I went to Charleston once I saw you at a park. I tried to reach you. Helen dragged you away and threatened me if I came back. The memory crashed into me, the red-haired woman, the desperate eyes, the moment Helen tore me away. I had thought it was a nightmare. It had been my mother all along. Why? My voice shook with fury. Why would Helen do this? Why keep me? Margaret's jaw tightened. Because of money. My father was a wealthy developer. His estate was supposed to be divided, but he despised Helen and didn't trust Richard. There was a clause if I lost custody of my child, the estate's assets would default to whoever claimed guardianship. Helen knew that. She convinced Richard to take you to raise you as theirs until the estate settled, but years passed. She buried your identity because returning you meant giving up control. Marcus was groomed as the heir, and you, her voice broke. You became the casualty. The truth detonated in my chest. All the cruelty, all the neglect had been by design. I wasn't unloved because I was flawed. I was unloved because Helen needed me diminished, erased, so her son could thrive unchallenged. I shook my head, rage and grief tangling into one raw cry. She stole me. She stole my life. Margaret reached across the table, gripping my hands. But she couldn't steal your strength. Look at you. You found the truth. You came to me. Daniel finally spoke, his voice firm. We have evidence, letters, the birth certificate. We have a lawyer. Helen can't bury this anymore." Margaret's eyes flared with both hope and fear. "Be careful. She's ruthless. I fought her once and lost you. Don't underestimate what she'll do to keep control." I straightened my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm not 6 years old anymore. She can't drag me away this time. And she can't silence the documents. Evidence never blinks." Margaret's tears returned, but now they were mingled with pride. She cupped my face in her hands, her thumb brushing away my tears like she was erasing decades of pain. "You are my daughter. No matter what name they gave you, no matter what lies they told, you are mine." The truth bomb had landed, obliterating the fragile illusion of the Carter family I once belonged to. I wasn't their shadow anymore. I was Margaret Doyle's daughter, and Helen was about to face the reckoning she had delayed for nearly 3 decades. The courthouse smelled of varnished wood and old paper, a scent that carried the weight of judgment. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Denise on one side and Daniel on the other, my hands folded tight in my lap. Across the aisle, Helen sat ramrod straight in her black suit, every hair in place, her chin lifted as if sheer arrogance could shield her from the law. Marcus slouched beside her, smirking like he was at a boardroom presentation rather than a hearing that could unravel his entire future. Denise rose first, her voice calm but cutting. "Your Honor, we are here today because my client Lydia Margaret Doyle was unlawfully concealed from her biological mother for 27 years. Evidence demonstrates falsification of birth records, custodial interference, and estate fraud." She laid the birth certificate on the judge's bench alongside the bundle of letters Margaret Doyle had written. The faded ink glared like fresh blood against the polished wood. Helen's attorney sputtered objections, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. "I will examine everything in due time. Let's proceed." Margaret sat behind me, her hand squeezing my shoulder. For years, she had lived as a grieving mother without closure. Today, she watched the woman who had stolen me squirm under the fluorescent lights. Helen finally took the stand. Her voice was honeyed poison. "I did what was necessary. Margaret was unstable. Richard and I agreed it was better if the child stayed with us. We gave her a name, a home, a future. Without me, Lydia would have had nothing. I couldn't hold back. I stood, my voice shaking but loud. Nothing. You gave me nothing but cruelty. You made sure every birthday was overshadowed, every success ignored, every memory erased. You didn't protect me. You buried me." The judge tapped his gavel lightly. "Miss Carter." "Doyle," Denise corrected smoothly. "Her name is Doyle." The gavel came down harder this time, but the point had been made. Helen's mask cracked, her lips tightening. Then came the records. Denise presented hospital archives proving no Lydia Carter was ever born at St. Mary's on my birth date. A forensic analyst testified the baby photos had been altered. Background, shadows, mismatched timestamps inconsistent. The truth piled higher and higher, a mountain Helen could no longer climb. Marcus was called next. His arrogance faltered under cross-examination. "You benefited from this fraud," Denise pressed. "You inherited privileges that rightfully belonged to Lydia. You knew she was different. Did you ever question why?" He smirked weakly. "Why would I? I was the son, the heir." The courtroom murmured. His entitlement rang louder than any denial. Finally, the sealed envelope from my father was read aloud. His words trembled through the courtroom as the clerk's voice echoed. "Forgive me, Lydia. I thought I was protecting you. I let Helen dictate too much, but you are Margaret's daughter and the truth belongs to you." Silence followed. Even Helen's attorney dropped his pen. The judge leaned forward, his voice grave. "This court finds substantial evidence of custodial interference and fraudulent concealment of identity. Furthermore, the estate documents tied to the Doyle inheritance were manipulated for personal gain." He turned to Helen. "You abused guardianship. You violated the trust of both this child and the law." Helen's face drained of color. Marcus muttered under his breath, fists clenching. "The estate will be restructured," the judge continued. "Half of the Carter holdings transferred to Lydia Doyle as restitution. Marcus Carter's claim to controlling interest in the family company is revoked, pending investigation of his complicity. Mrs. Helen Carter, this court refers your case to the district attorney for potential criminal charges including fraud and custodial interference." Gasps rippled through the room. Helen's mouth opened, but no sound came. For the first time in my life, she looked small, fragile, not in body, but in power. I turned, meeting her eyes. "You told me once I should be grateful. Grateful for scraps for silence for being erased. Today I am grateful for the truth, and the truth has destroyed you." The judge struck his gavel one final time. Case adjourned. Helen slumped back in her chair, Marcus cursing under his breath. Margaret wept behind me, clutching Daniel's hand like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. Walking out of that courtroom, sunlight spilling across the marble steps, I felt something I had never felt before. Vindication. For 27 years, I was the shadow. Today, I stepped into the light with my name, my mother, and justice carved into the record books. But justice was not just a verdict. It was the sight of Helen's trembling hands as bailiffs escorted her out. It was the shock on Marcus's face as shareholders whispered about his downfall. It was the undeniable, irreversible knowledge that their empire built on lies had begun to collapse. Justice finally had a face, and it was mine. The weeks after the trial felt like stepping into air after living underground. For the first time in 27 years, I signed my name as Lydia Margaret Doyle on legal papers. The ink bled into the page like roots finally finding soil. The judge's ruling had done more than redistribute assets. It had torn down the facade of power Helen and Marcus had built brick by brick over my stolen life. News spread quickly in Charleston. Social clubs that once opened their doors to Helen closed them without hesitation. Marcus's smug face disappeared from the business journals as shareholders forced him to resign. The Carter name, once uttered with reverence in real estate circles, became a cautionary tale whispered over boardroom tables. Helen herself withdrew from society, her sharp wardrobe and sharper tongue, useless against the stain of fraud. When she passed me once on Broad Street, her eyes darted away, shame curdling the edges of her posture. It was the first time I had ever seen her unable to meet my gaze. But the aftermath wasn't only about their downfall, it was about my rebuilding. Margaret and I spent hours piecing together the years stolen from us. She showed me the quilts she made during winters when grief threatened to consume her, each square stitched with prayers that her daughter might still be alive. She gave me the pink dress embroidered with MD, pressing it into my hands with trembling fingers. "It was always yours," she whispered. For the first time, I let myself believe it. Daniel stood beside me through it all, steady as a lighthouse. When I told him I felt guilty for letting grief and rage consume me, he reminded me, "You survived what was designed to erase you. Surviving isn't weakness, it's defiance." His words became a mantra I carried into every decision afterward. With part of the estate restitution, I didn't chase luxury the way Marcus always had. Instead, I started the Truth and Resilience Foundation, a scholarship fund for children caught in custody disputes, for those who had been silenced or manipulated by the people meant to protect them. The first scholarship letter I signed brought tears to my eyes. For once, my past pain was a seed that grew into someone else's hope. On a quiet Sunday, Margaret and I visited my father's grave. She placed lilies at the stone, her hand brushing mine. "He made terrible choices," she said softly, "but he left you the truth in the end." Maybe that was his way of trying to make it right. I knelt in the grass, fingers tracing the name, Richard Carter. For the first time, I felt no need to beg for his approval. I whispered only, "I know who I am now." As I stood, the sunlight filtered through the oak trees, warm and steady. I realized then that the story Helen tried to script for me had collapsed. I was no longer the forgotten daughter, no longer the shadow trailing behind Marcus's golden boy glow. I was Lydia Margaret Doyle, a woman who had clawed her way to truth with letters, memory, and sheer will. And if there was one lesson carved into me deeper than any scar, it was, this family is not who hides you in lies or demands gratitude for chains. Family is who stands with you in the light when the truth finally breaks free. To those who listened, I ask you, have you ever uncovered a family secret that changed everything you thought you knew about yourself? Share it, tell it, because the truth, no matter how long it takes, is what sets us free.